Scientists tell us that the human brain may remain conscious for several seconds after decapitation, a grotesque footnote to an already brutal story. If true, what were Anne Boleyn's final thoughts as that French blade sang through the air on a cold May morning in 1536? Triumph? Regret? Or perhaps the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had played the most dangerous game in England, and played it better than almost anyone alive? This is the story of how a diplomat's daughter from Kent became the most powerful woman in England, ignited a religious revolution, and still ended up kneeling in the straw of a tower scaffold. It is a story about desire and power, obsession and betrayal, and one woman who refused even at the very end to beg. Act 1. The Girl Who Came Back Different. London, 1522. A young woman steps off a boat from France, and nobody quite realizes that England will never be the same. Anne Boleyn had been gone for years, shipped off first to the Netherlands, then to the glittering French court of Queen Claude. She had watched how power worked at close range. She had absorbed the ideas of the Renaissance, debated theology, learned to move through a room like she owned it. When she returned to the English court, she was 21 years old and armed with something far more dangerous than beauty. She had a mind. In an era when women were expected to be decorative and obedient, and was sharp, opinionated, and relentlessly ambitious. She had dark eyes that contemporaries described as almost hypnotic, olive skin that stood out in a court full of pale English roses, and a wit quick enough to draw blood. She was not conventionally beautiful by Tudor standards, and she did not care. She caught the attention of King Henry VIII almost immediately. At the time, Henry was still bound to Catherine of Aragon, his Spanish queen of nearly 2 decades. The marriage had produced one surviving child, a daughter Mary, but no male heir, and Henry's patience was running out. When he began to pursue Anne, expecting the same easy conquest he had enjoyed with her older sister Mary, he discovered something unexpected, and said no. She had watched what happened to women who became royal mistresses. They were used, discarded, and forgotten, and had different plans. According to the accounts passed down through history, she made her position clear. If Henry wanted her, he would have to marry her. It was, by any measure, an astonishing gamble. Henry VIII was one of the most powerful men in the known world. He could have simply moved on. Instead, he became obsessed. Act 2. The 7-Year Siege. What followed was not a romance, it was a siege. For 7 years, Henry pursued Anne across the landscape of European politics. He wrote her love letters so personal that they still survive today, tucked in Vatican archives where they ended up after Henry's messengers were intercepted. He showered her with gifts and titles. He cleared rivals from her path. And when the Pope, under heavy pressure from Catherine's nephew, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, refused to grant the divorce Henry needed, the king made a decision that would shake Western Christendom to its foundations. He simply stopped recognizing the Pope's authority. The English Reformation, that seismic split from the Catholic Church that reshaped the religious, political, and cultural identity of an entire nation, was born in significant part from one man's determination to marry one woman, and was not a passive bystander in this process. She was an active participant. She smuggled reformist literature into court. She debated scripture with bishops. She pushed Henry toward Protestant thinkers when his instincts might have led him toward compromise. In January of 1533, Henry and Anne were secretly married in a pre-dawn ceremony. She was already pregnant. Both of them prayed it would be a boy. It wasn't. Act 3. The Crown and Its Price. On September 7, 1533, Anne gave birth to a healthy red-haired daughter she named Elizabeth. Henry left the christening early. The disappointment was crushing, not just personally but politically. Everything Henry had risked, every enemy he had made, every theological argument he had constructed, it had all been justified in his mind by the certainty that Anne would give him a son. Now, with a daughter sleeping in the royal nursery, the whispers began, and did not collapse. She became queen in the fullest sense of the word, wielding influence over religious appointments, supporting the translation of the Bible into English so ordinary people could read it, and surrounding herself with the most intellectually alive people at court. She was, by almost any measure, a remarkable queen, bold where her predecessors had been cautious, reforming where they had been traditional. But she was also making enemies at a rate that would prove fatal. The old noble families resented her rise. Committed Catholics blamed her for the break with Rome. Her own sharp tongue had cut too many people too deeply. And as the miscarriages began, first in 1534, then a heartbreaking loss in early 1536 of what might have been the son Henry had waited a decade for, the king's affection curdled into something darker. Henry had already begun to notice a young woman of the court named Jane Seymour. Quiet, fair, and carefully obedient in all the ways and had never been, Jane represented everything Henry now claimed to want. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister and once Anne's ally, began to sense which way the wind was turning. He made his choice accordingly. Act 4, The Manufactured Fall. The charges against Anne Boleyn were almost certainly fabricated. Most serious historians who have examined the evidence come to the same conclusion. The case was built on coerced confessions, terrified courtiers, and a legal system entirely willing to deliver whatever verdict the king required. Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George, a charge so extreme that it appears designed less to convince than to shock, to so thoroughly destroy her reputation that no one would defend her. The evidence was thin to the point of transparency. The dates cited in the indictment sometimes placed Anne in locations she provably was not. Her alleged lovers were arrested and, under pressure, gave statements that confirmed whatever was needed of them. She was arrested on May 2, 1536, and taken to the Tower of London through Traitor's Gate, the same entrance she had used 3 years earlier when arriving for her coronation. Her trial on May 15 was a spectacle dressed as a proceeding. She had no legal counsel. She could not cross-examine her accusers. The jury included men who had every reason to see her condemned. And yet, by every account, she defended herself brilliantly, calm, precise, and relentlessly logical in her demolition of each charge. One observer recorded that she spoke so wisely and with such composure that those watching could hardly believe she was the same woman depicted in the indictment. It didn't matter. The verdict was decided before she opened her mouth. Guilty. Initially sentenced to burning, the traditional punishment for a queen convicted of adultery, Henry commuted the sentence to beheading, and sent to France for an expert executioner, a swordsman from Calais known for the speed and precision of his work. It was, in the cold arithmetic of Tudor mercy, a favor. Act 5, May 19, 1536. The morning came grey and cold, and had been told the execution would happen at 8 o'clock. She had prayed, taken communion, and prepared herself. Then came word of a delay, it would not be until noon. The cruelty of those extra hours, the waiting with nowhere to go and nothing to do but sit with the fact of your own approaching death, is almost unbearable to contemplate. She spent the time in prayer. She reportedly repeated a single phrase over and over, "Lord, have mercy on me." She swore on the Eucharist, the most sacred object she could invoke, that she had never betrayed the king. "For my salvation," she said, "I am guiltless of that for which I die." When the hour finally arrived, she dressed with the same deliberate care she had always brought to her appearance. A dark gray cloak trimmed with fur. Beneath it, a deep crimson bodice, a color chosen, it is said, not for vanity but for practicality. It would not show the blood. She said goodbye to her ladies-in-waiting, pressing small gifts into their hands. A prayer book with a personal inscription, a piece of jewelry, a handkerchief. Then she walked to the scaffold that had been built in the courtyard of the tower. Lower and more intimate than the public platforms usually used for such things, designed specifically for the foreign swordsman's method. About 1,000 people were present. It was quieter than anyone expected. As Anne walked past, men removed their hats. It was not the gesture of a crowd watching a traitor die. It was something closer to the recognition due someone who had lived uncommonly. On the scaffold, she was given the chance to speak. She used it with characteristic precision, not to plead, not to confess, not to accuse. "Good Christian people," she said, her voice steady in the cold air, "I am come hither to die according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler or more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good and gentle lord." It was a masterpiece of controlled language. She confessed nothing. She named no enemies. She offered public forgiveness to the man who had ordered her death, knowing full well it would be the version of events preserved in the historical record. Even here, in her last moments, she was thinking strategically, protecting her daughter's future by refusing to make the king her enemy in the telling of her own story. She knelt on the straw, removed her headdress. One of her ladies tied a blindfold over her eyes. She adjusted it herself, then folded her hands and waited, her back straight. The executioner, dressed in black, moved quietly behind her. Accounts suggest he used a small misdirection, calling softly to his assistant for the sword, causing Anne to turn her head slightly, and in that fraction of movement he struck. One blow. Clean and swift. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, was dead at 35. Epilogue: what she left behind. Her body was placed in an arrow chest, No coffin had been prepared, and buried beneath the stones of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, inside the tower where she had spent her last 17 days. There was no state funeral, no monument, no formal mourning. Within days, Henry VIII was engaged to Jane Seymour. Within 3 years, Jane was dead, having finally given the king his male heir, a sickly boy who would reign for 6 years as Edward VI before dying at 15. The daughter Anne had left behind, dismissed as a disappointment and declared illegitimate after her mother's execution, grew up to become Elizabeth I, perhaps the most capable monarch England ever produced. She reigned for 45 years. Under her leadership, England became a naval superpower, produced Shakespeare, defeated the Spanish Armada, and entered what historians still call its golden age. Anne Boleyn never got to see any of it. But she built the foundation for all of it, through her religious convictions, her political instincts, and the fact that she survived long enough to give the world the extraordinary woman her daughter became. She was silenced on a May morning in the Tower. But the silence didn't hold. It never does when the story is big enough. And